I was born on the Dublin street where the Lyle runs the beat, and the loving English speaker walked all over us. And every single night when Peadar would come home tight, he'd invite the neighbours out with this chorus. Come on, shibboleth's hands, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. How the RA made you run like Callaway from the green and lovely lanes of Peadar.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, comrades. We're here today on a follow-up from the conference that you had in Fermanagh last month. It was the Jim Lynagh Winter School. It was a great success and great conversations to be had. I followed it myself, actually, online. I wasn't there in person, but it was very interesting to tune in and to hear the different speakers, some of you who were there yourselves and others. But as a follow-up to that, it would be important to have a summary of what actually happened, some analysis of what happened. And, you know, there's a few questions that can be asked to deduce really what needs to happen, where we're at today and where we're actually going. So the first question I'd like to put to comrades is, first of all, why are we where we are today? I know that's a big question, and I'm going to put that to you, Tommy, first of all.
Yes, well, today we're reviewing the situation in Ireland and how it's impacting on us. In Ireland today, we're not only occupied in the northern 6 counties by the British Empire, but we're in the 26 counties where victims are subject to what we would describe as neocolonialism, subject to the whims of the United States, European Union and Britain, and how they see Ireland as an asset in their imperial policy. That may sound rather extreme to many people, but actually it's a fact. When you look at what's happening in the field of the economy, that we're being told regularly that we can't do anything to upset the Americans or the European Union because they'll withdraw their high-tech companies and country will be bankrupt again, and we'll go back to the old days where we had to emigrate and live on potatoes and buttermilk, that type of nonsense. But the fact is that is actually economic imperialism. We're subject to a neocolonialist imposition. And we've got to the stage now where Fianna Fáil is unionist to the heart, implementing a pro-union strategy via Micheál Martin and his team of leadership team in Fianna Fáil. No surprise, of course, Fine Gael are the same. And it's a challenge. Now, what we're experiencing at the moment is that whatever opposition, and there's many signs of for optimism. For example, the election last week of Kathleen Connolly on a very basic left-wing socialist ticket and gained the greatest number of votes of anybody in a presidential election ever, well over 900,000 votes. And there is optimism, but we've got to keep in mind that we've got to deal with if you like, what I would describe as the threat from social democracy, where rather than socialism, we're talking about policies that are designed to, as they would see it, to improve capitalism, which is not, it's an oxymoron to talk about improving capitalism. It's not just possible. And while Sinn Féin, many of their electorate, many of the people who vote for Sinn Féin do for all the right reasons, they believe they're seeing progress, but unfortunately Sinn Féin, in my opinion, is heading towards becoming Fianna Fáil Mark II. So that's where we're at today, and I think this is why it was so important that we had that conversation in Fermanagh, drew inspiration from the life and work of the late Jim Lynagh and his comrades, that we're not actually out for a united Ireland per se. We're out for a workers' republic, Connolly's dream, Jim Lynagh's dream, and the dream of so many others. This has to be more than a dream, it has to be a reality, and that's what we're talking about. So that's what I would say where we're at today.
Thank you, Tommy. And Barry or Colm, anything to add to that when we're just looking at why are we here in this situation today?
I think that, you know, we can't ignore the fact that we have been occupied by British colonialism for close to 900 years now. And the settlements in 1922 and 1998, imperial pacification processes have had their effect on people's thinking. They've had the effect on the population as well. And in the absence of, a direct conflict or war, there's a sort of a normalization of the positions within the social positions and social conditions within the North and the South. And generally speaking, people don't see any major problems per se, even though, as Tommy quite correctly pointed out, there's any amount of problems. I mean, we don't have sovereignty, very high levels of poverty, homelessness, poor health system. Of all those things, that's something that we need to identify and work with.
Mm-hmm. And Colm, on the point that Tommy brought up about neo-colonialism, a lot of people often focus on the occupied 6 counties, fair enough. But could you expand even on why we have these 26 occupied in a different kind of way, maybe not as overtly as in the 6 counties?
So for me, struggle in Ireland, and Ireland is synonymous with struggle. Internationally, our struggle has always been about trying to get control of the ownership and of the resources, control and ownership of the resources that make life worth living in any country, but particularly here in Ireland. That's a class struggle. It never gets articulated as that, because largely the people who stole everything and controlled all the resources, establishment, the British ruling class. So the struggle gets lost in just a struggle against Britain, but clearly it's a class struggle. In 1920s, the British ruling class, unable to hold Ireland in the face of the might of the opposition of the Republican Army and the civil actions of the vast majority of the population, decided to make a strategic withdrawal, move to the north, creating Connolly's carnival of reaction that we saw, that went on for another 100 years, and leaving in the south the control of the resources and the government and the wishes of the people in the hands of a compliant comprador class, cronies who would leave Ireland and the part of it that was supposedly liberated in the hands of the same people who worked in the shadow of British domination and other imperial domination. So this, we have further we've had struggles in the north, outbreaks of unrest, open war that lasted for over 30 years. But finally, again, imperialism seeks to make a further recalculation of its forces, whereby it brings the Republican movement into acceptance of its own imprisonment and its own enslavement and its own subjugation. So this is the same process that I think the developments that are happening now with Connolly and others being elected, formation of left, right politics, this is a huge development in Ireland.
Thank you, Colm. There's a little bit of interference there across, with the reception, but so it's a lot of people kind of will have different views, and I think that like what the 3 of you have said about why we are where we are today is very important to understand the historical context, and people will have different views and opinions on that, but you've given a very good synopsis of it. But the question really is, so what do we do right now to begin to build for a socialist republic? There are lots of people talking about how do we build for a better future, but we're interested in building for a socialist republic. What needs to happen, Barry, in your opinion, for that to be the case?
Well, I think there's a massive job of awareness raising. I mean, you can give that all sorts of fancy names, but I mean, at the end of the day, people have to get to understand how the world actually works and how their countries actually work, and as opposed to how they believe it works or how they're told it works. And I think that a major part of that is for socialist Republicans and communists to be involved in the material issues of people's lives, like housing, health and education, the stuff that people need all the time. And you know, unfortunately, we are seen to be sort of outside of that. We're sort of, you know, those Republicans are seen to be, you know, standing at monuments, or they want to fight the Brits, or, you know, there's all sorts of cliches that are used against Republicans all the time. And, you know, that's not the picture at all. I mean, okay, so we spent so many years, and our history is sort of dominated by armed struggle and you know, getting the Brits out of Ireland, both in the 26 counties and in the north. But that's not the whole picture, and it never was the whole picture. So, I mean, we need to become involved in people's lives, quite simply, at every level that we possibly can. It doesn't matter where that is. It doesn't matter what that is. And we need to approach it from a radical and a revolutionary perspective. And in doing those things, we don't want to be doing them from a clientelist perspective. We need to be doing them from, as I said, a radical revolutionary way, and in a way that people begins to see, join up the dots and realise that the reason why there's no houses, the reason why there's a poor health service, the reason why education's the way it is, all of there's a programme of work there around all those things that we can use as vehicles to, and we should use and must use as vehicles of education and building.
And Tommy, on that point, like the Barry's saying about raising awareness and about, I suppose, touching the ground where the issues really are, the bread and butter issues are. The main one right now in Ireland is housing. The state of housing is appalling. And, you know, if you're not homeless, we're in a state of precarity where we're, you know, only one paycheck away from being homeless. Do you agree, Tommy, that it's like, how do you would go about raising awareness? Everybody uses this phrase, let's raise awareness. How does that actually happen, Tommy, in your view?
Well, I mean, there's two things I think we've got to keep in mind. We never dismiss the fact that we publicise the issues, use whatever methodology we can access. And social media should not be dismissed just because it's a novelty. A lot of people follow social media, so I think we can avail of what opportunities we have. I always keep in mind that I think it was the 15th or 14th or 15th century, the printing press was devised, which led to the spread of a particular book called the Bible, which very soon, once people started to read it, actually led to the Reformation, which in objective terms of historical objectivity was a useful development to break the connection with the papacy. So now we have access to the social media in a way we wouldn't have had it before to publicise. So I wouldn't dismiss that, but also there's action on the ground. Now, housing is a major issue, as you've said, and I totally agree with that. Housing is the privatisation of housing, marketisation to make housing available through the private market forces leaves people without it. It's not a home. It's not a right to have a home. As I think, to be fair, in fairness, now Catherine Conley, the president, has identified it that a home should be your constitutional right, not something that you can have to pay for whether you can or not. Now, I'm thinking back to the 1960s when housing issues sparked off the civil rights movement, not far from where we were reared in Caledon in County Tyrone. And it led to the civil rights movement. Now, with the caveat, of course, that the North being the North, it was going to invariably end up in a shootout. But we don't have to go that direction. But I think we have to look at objective to highlight the issues in terms of direct action, not propaganda by the deed, which I'm very afraid of, but direct action. Now we have the CATU union at the moment. It is a vehicle that could be availed of. And I think something like that. We've got to have direct action see where we can go to highlight the issue and just demonstrate to people that they don't have to sit back just and take what they're getting, but there is options. But yes, I think there's a blend of the publicising the issue and actively involvement. So always live in Gramsci's great statement about pessimism of the mind and optimism of the heart. Always remember, we'll always be optimistic, but there's change possible.
Thanks, Tommy. Yeah, and Colm, then maybe a slightly different question, but leading on from that. So we avail of all mechanisms that we have, tools like social media, but also, direct action. What does that look like? What does even building for a socialist republic look like within our communities then, on the ground? What does that mean, and what came up even at the conference last month?
Well, firstly, I kind of say that identifying capitalism as the cause of all oppression, both in Ireland and internationally, that's the first and foremost for any activist, and to be clear in our heads that this is that's what's causal, and the solution to the barbarism of capitalism is obviously socialism. Now, if we're agreed on that, then obviously the next point is to move to forming alliances, broad fronts based on that solid belief that only the abolition or the ending of capitalism and that it's replaced by socialism will ever bring any meaningful freedom to any people. Bernadette Devlin asked the question of Republicans, why is it that you never understand or never sit down to question how you've been defeated so many times? And for me, I did. My notion about that question is that in the rush to create broad fronts historically, Republicans have made alliances, cross-class alliances with the bourgeoisie, with the middle class, with the gombeen men, the aspiring to be rich and richer, and people who represented their own class interests and will do a deal with the ruling class in our country, with capitalism itself. We're quite happy to do that and sell the workers out. Now, there's the dilemma. It's how to, but at the same time, ideologically clear enough that it doesn't compromise on the very basis of the practical nature of struggle about what will make us free and what will not allow us. So it's very easy to get involved in struggle with no real solution emerging out of that at the end. So it's that clarity. But there are little seeds of hope. I mean, as part of the imperial process, they had implemented a system in Ireland and in the North whereby there was no discussion of class politics. There was no such thing as left or right. In the South, they had Tweedledee and Tweedledum, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, two civil war parties with the exact same ideology, middle class, capitalist, but emerging somehow in the repression of republicanism. And I think there's a huge repression of any notion of addressing or even talking about the occupation of Ireland. In that repression, there has emerged a group of people and a consensus, and you can see it through the Palestinian resistance, and you can see it's manifest even in Connolly's campaign. There's a coalescing of forces around the demand for a left alternative. Now, it's to drive that left alternative forward, but also further to the left, because at the moment it doesn't have ideological clarity. That's for me.
Thank you, Colm. And on the point, Barry, about, there's a lot of people talking now about broad fronts and the broad and unified left or unity across the left. But like you say, I have to agree, Colm, that with repression comes clarity as well. What's your take on it, or what other items came up in that discussion?
The issue of the broad front came up, and naturally enough, Republicans in particular are sort of afraid of broad fronts because they see compromise in it. But I mean, I don't think it's broad fronts as much as it's about dealing with issues in a broader way and that people can remain in their groups, but that they come together to deal with issues. When you're not talking about putting together some monolithic type group or party that begins to attack all these various issues that we have raised. It's not about that, and I don't think it should be about that, because we're not at that stage. That day, hopefully, if we're serious about our campaigning and if we're serious about what we're building for and the struggle we're involved in, the day will come when we have to position ourselves to be in a radical and revolutionary way again, I might emphasise, to take power in Ireland. And I mean, and I continually say, if we're not about that, then what is it exactly that we are about? Now, the people have to understand that. And, you know, one of the ways of demonstrating to the people what you're about is to work within the communities, to demonstrate what socialism actually is like, working on the ground. Until we do that, because most people, naturally enough, because of the hegemonic power of the media and the church and our education system and whatever else, they're afraid of it. They don't even understand what it is. They haven't the faintest idea what you're talking about. And I think it's some sort of mystery planet away out there in the universe that is not real at all. But we as socialist Republicans need to demonstrate to people on the ground that this is actually a possibility. It's a reality. And we might need to do it in very simple Mickey Mouse ways initially, but do it we must. Because otherwise, I mean, we can have all these conversations we want and we can write all the articles we want, but the biggest end of the population, they need to see things. Because unfortunately, revolution is about people's needs. And that's, people will always ask the question, what's in it for me? And, you know, okay, you can ignore that and say it's selfish and all the rest of it, but that's the reality. And we have to recognise that reality and build towards it. And in that building, what we're doing is to anchor ourselves within the communities and also to build a form of defence against the inevitable onslaughts that will come against us. I mean, there's no doubt that if we start to make great progress as a consequence, we'll say, of the revelations throughout the Palestinian genocide, things could move quickly enough, but the system might have to find itself having to introduce high levels of oppression to try and get the train stopped. That's when we need to be embedded within our communities to be sure that, number one, we can achieve what we want to achieve, that we have the support of the people, that we're anchored within the people, and that any achievements that we make, that we retain them. Because it's about retention too. It's not just about achieving a goal or two and then it sort of melts away into thin air. It needs to be done in such a way that it's retained. And I mean, and unless we build within our communities to do that, then, you know, you can go to all the marches you want, and yes, I suppose we need to go to marches, and you can stand in front of all the monuments you want, and we need to do that too. But it's not enough. You see, this is the problem. It's not enough. It won't move the dial, as they talk about. It won't rock the system. It won't deter the capitalist imperialist system. It won't stop them. I mean, they can actually live with that and tolerate that, as we know from the 30-year war. They could live with it and tolerate it and control it and manipulate it. And that's the kind of thinking that I think was trying to be brought out at the Winter School. And it's important that we think about those things.
Well, this is the last question, and it's a question after the title of the book by the same name, The Streets, the Ballot Box, or both. Well, actually, Tommy, I'm going to ask you maybe a trickier question. What about all those people, and I know plenty of them myself, who are disenfranchised with both the streets and the ballot box? They don't want, they're inactive, they've given up, they feel hopeless, both when it comes to voting and when it comes to activism or being active. They're like, I've tried that, I was involved in the water charges campaign, look where that got us. This feeling of absolute hopelessness, defeatism and despair. Like, surely we need to look at, you're right, Tommy, there was a record number of people who voted for Catherine Connolly, highest whatever in any presidential election. But if we look back to last year and we look at the elections, the national elections, the highest number of people ever in the history of the state didn't go out and vote. What about those people, Tommy?
Yes, well, I mean, I think the point here I continue to emphasize is never surrender to despair. And in history, I think we can look back at our history with some optimism. Keep in mind that in the middle of the 19th century, Ireland was subject to dreadful treatment And there was several responses. But Daniel O'Connell wanted us to become West Brits. We had the Irish Nationalist Party wanted home rule. But in the middle of that century, we had an organisation founded in Dublin in 1857, James Stephens, the IRB. And they declared for an Irish Republic. They declared, and not only that, but which was seen to be a pipe dream at the time, when faced with the opposition of the British Empire and all its might. But look, they succeeded in energising the key issue at the time was the land, through the Land League, Fenian Michael Davitt. Now, they actually inspired through the IRB and brought the majority of the people, the poor farmers and their families along with them, to see that the need for succeeded in forcing the British to introduce several reforms which were not comprehensive enough to avoid the insurrection in 1916. Now, we were betrayed in 1922 with the treaty, but in comparison to what had happened before, it is an indication there that we can involve ourselves in direct action in terms of what's needed. Housing, for example, is one, health is the other, but we've got to get involved. And housing is just one issue that impacts practically everybody, because even those people who would currently own a house, they probably have families, youngsters that are badly in need of housing. And it's an issue that's germane to the cause. That what we have to identify, put up the issue that we're out for a workers' republic, but the only way to achieve that is through direct involvement in the day-to-day actions. That only through having a workers' or socialist republic will we achieve housing for all. Will we have a comprehensive health service for all? Will we have education for all? We have workers' rights, that people can see directly that by involving in their direct actions along those lines, that it can only be effectively answered by establishing that workers' republic. I think that's what we have to do. And we have lessons from the past that it can be enacted, it can work. This time around, we've got to be sure that we're not betrayed. But if we're talking about a workers' republic as distinct from just an Irish free state, that's where we have to go. Make sure that we can't be so betrayed by a compromise, as Colm talks about, by a mistaken emphasis on a broad front that will allow room for the bourgeoisie to direct or influence it. That the core is, to be frank about it, a Bolshevik core with the Leninist ideas as well. We don't rely just purely on Fenianism, but we have to look at advanced beyond Fenianism. Take Leninism as the ideal method of operating.
Thanks, Tommy. Colm, how do you envisage that? Like Tommy mentioned, existing organisations like CATU, for example, of course, and Barry, what you're saying is we need to be there. We need to be part of all of that. But moving on from that, even like what's existing, how do we advance and how do we come to be at the forefront of the struggle as well, rather than just joining what already is in existence? Do you see any room or scope for that?
Well, I think it's going to be necessity, because whatever about our own efforts, the vast majority of working class were kept down, suppressed, and enslaved on the basis of the notion of a social contract that provided a bullshit democracy or bourgeois democracy, whichever you prefer. It's very clear that capitalism is coming, whether we want it or not. Capitalism is coming for your hospitals, it's coming for your schools, it's coming for every liberal reform that had been provided to workers previously. It's coming again, even to repress the false democracy or the bullshit democracy, as I describe it, that pretended that you had a right to change things. And you can see it in the repression of the Palestinian movements. You can see it in the repression of workers' rights. So workers will and are standing up. You can see in the North, they have suppressed the very notion that that there is an occupation happening, while at the same time they will entreat the people in the South to give up their sovereignty or they give up any vestiges of sovereignty they might have and their vestiges of neutrality that remain in order to oppose the occupation of Ukraine while you can't talk. But while they're doing that, watch what's happening. Irish language and Irish cultural identity has now moved to such an importance that it became a pivotal issue in that last election, which will change nothing, as we know. And that cultural identity and that expression of Irishness is an anti-imperialist expression. It's a left expression. Now, it's for us to articulate, to provide an understanding of the world that will explain to those activists and those people who know and are representing their own interests and their own desires and their own needs, to bring that forward in an articulate way. But we will go nowhere unless we go nowhere on our own, and unless it is the working class who will liberate any given situation. Now, we as the working class try and find our identity, articulate our needs, and formulate pathways out of that. But I think it's there. And just in response to the people who are out on the streets about Palestine, were the people who cut their teeth in the water campaign. That politicization, which the state will tell you it's pointless, it's useless, that everyday articulation of struggle and understanding of struggle is percolating round and will emerge somewhere else, and hopefully in a more sophisticated and a more articulate and more clear picture of how to defeat capitalism.
Mm-hmm. And I think also as a part of whenever I was tuning in and just even reading up on some of the reports that were done on the Winter School, Barry, that it was also said that we need to be very clear and emphasise that our full objective isn't to base our activism or our politics around populism. I think that's kind of what you're touching on there too, Colm. Like, what is the danger of populism?
No, it's single issue campaigns can be thwarted. They can be, like the water campaign, slight amendments. We need to raise our demands always. So when capitalism gives us a small concession, raise the demand to a higher concession and keep making our demand. But at the back of it, knowing that our core demand, our demand that we will never give up on, is the right to the ownership of the resources of the country. And if people believe that, and they understand everything in that context, that they have the same rights as somebody living in Fox Rock, then that's a huge belief and a huge understanding. This is what we need to persuade people of. At the moment, we're so oppressed that people don't actually see themselves as equal to our masters, our class masters particularly. Yeah.
So as well as decolonising the country, or decolonising the 6 counties and ridding ourselves of British occupation, we need to decolonise our schools, our universities, which have become factories and business, like big corporations themselves. But also, I think, Colin, that boils down to the decolonisation of the brain. The brain is so
Yes.
fixed, this fixed mindset of like, well, we are subjects, we are inferior, we are, and unless we have that a different, a sovereign mindset, and we have a license to question, why do we think this way even,
People, so they say that by the age of 10, a child will internalize their class position. So a child born
without knowing it,
realizing it, and will now, it takes a lot to throw off those chains, and it's only through struggle and reading and understanding and patience that people eventually come to a clarity. But at the heart of everybody's conversation in Ireland, there is a complete knowledge that the oppression of class is there. We don't articulate it well. We talk about, we don't trust the politicians and they're all a crowd of crooks and all of that kind of stuff. But it's to bringing it from that common language to something more articulate. That's where we need to be at.
And the final word then to you, Barry, just to sum up on what was really a very successful Winter School. When you hear it in summary, quite succinct, it's only taken us not even half an hour. just to sum up, what's the overall message that we'll depart with?
Well, I think to add to what Colm said there, and has been said, we absolutely need to decolonise the minds of the population of Ireland and the neo-colonial minds within the south of Ireland. We also need to point out to people that capitalism is for the 1% and that's it. Don't be under any illusions. And don't be under any illusions that campaigns that you win, as Colm pointed out, that's only a minor win. The major goal is the destruction of the capitalist imperialist system, and certainly the capitalist system within Ireland to start with. And another point, as a part of our strategy, as well as working within our communities and building within our communities and being on the streets, which are all part of it, the other part of it, which Republicans in particular have a bit of a disdain for, with a lot of justification actually, and that is our use of the bourgeois electoral parliaments to promote our message. I mean, we should not be going into parliaments in an attempt to gain concessions or an attempt to prop up that very parliamentary system. We should be going in there to destroy that system in whatever way we can. And we can only do that effectively if we first of all build or in the same process, build our community councils and people's Dálaí and whatever else we can do within a network, a strong network on the ground outside, if we'll say just an elected local councillor. I mean, there's no way. We know, we have the history of it there. There's not that there's any doubt about it. There is no possibility of making any kind of creative or influential or transformative change within any parliament, be it local council or Stormont or any of the Dáil or anywhere else. There is no chance within that system. It's not happening. But as Lenin clearly did within the Soviet Revolution, and is well outlined in the book by the same name, The Streets, the Parliament, or both. And I mean, it was something that Marx and Engels developed at a very early stage too, and recognised. I mean, and they weren't deluded by the fact that they thought that they were going to gain anything through bourgeois parliaments, but they seen the value of approaching it from a radical and revolutionary perspective. In fact, revolutionary parliamentarianism, I think, was one of the names was used for it. So, I mean, we need to start thinking about stuff like that, because there'll not always be mass protests on the street for issues or the Palestinian issue or anything like that there. And we need, as Socialist Republicans, we need to be looking forward to how are we going to conduct ourselves in the next 5-10 years. And I would not rule out, I mean, I don't see any possibility, as I clearly outlined, of making any progress for change within bourgeois parliaments. I do see the tactical use of being a part of bourgeois parliaments, but only in a radical and revolutionary way, with the emphasis on destroying their parliaments and destroying their capitalist system.
So, just to end up, thank you all, Tommy, Barry and Colm, and it's great to see the very first winter school, and looking forward to spring school coming up. No pressure.
The hope is to have a winter school in another county, possibly next year. Okay. That venue will remain secret just for now.
Okay. Well, there'll be lots of opportunities for us to continue. As you say, it's about getting the message out, and it's about having patience. And this is, the revolution isn't going to create some kind of instant magical recipe that's going to sort everything all out, in a day or a week or even a year.
Can I say, Róisín, so we need to focus on the key issues that are happening at the moment, and obviously Palestine is the centre of that, and it's solidifying anti-imperialist feeling and people, freedom-loving people in Ireland together, and bringing a possibility to talk about our own country, but also the question of neutrality. Anybody who has a breath in them anywhere should be trying to focus on this issue, because it's somewhere where the ruling parties are vulnerable, and I think they will, if the campaign was well enough articulated and well enough supported, I think there would be mass support from that. And if we can find issues that force them to retreat from their imperialist agenda, that's a victory for us.
And they're very afraid of it too, because they don't even want to have a referendum on it.
No, and it's great to see it happening, and I have to give credit to the Neutrality Roadshow, to Fionn, to Neve, who kick-started that, and they're still going. And the great news is, just an update on that, is that they're inspiring local towns, villages, communities to go off and take up the mantle and to continue the initiative where they're
That's
at.
good.
So that's very positive news, and you're right, because that project might not say it's an anti-imperialist project, but it is actually an initiative that is
Yeah.
rooted in, and you have to have anti-imperialist understanding to be able to take up that cause and to want to fight for neutrality. Some people talk about let's maintain neutrality, save neutrality. Some people say let's fight for neutrality. We don't have it, but it doesn't matter. It's an issue that's very, very current. And you're right, Colm, it needs to be supported and developed further. Look, comrades, we'll see you soon, hopefully in person rather than down a Zoom. But thank you for your time today, and all the best. Free Ireland,
Thank
free
you.
Yeah,
Palestine,
free the word,
free the world,
free the
Thank you.
working class.
Thank you,
free the
Róisín. Thank
working
you.
class.
Thank you,
Right.
Róisín.
Stand aside.
Sorry, Malcolm. Blonde.
Thanks.
Dum dum da da da.